Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to welcome all of you for being here. I know it's a Friday afternoon and everyone's trying to wind down for the week, but we do have important issues we have to discuss at this board meeting. This meeting is called a special meeting because there were some members of this board that felt we need to have an in-depth discussion concerning our search for a new CEO. So I felt it imperative that we call this board meeting today. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Seward to have a discussion as to the purpose of this board meeting, and then we'll turn it over to the discussion of the recruiting process by Greg Moser. Mr. Seward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, fellow board members. Last week, Mr. Moser and I had the opportunity to talk, and what was the catalyst for that discussion was a series of communications that were provided to the board.
Excuse me a minute. Did we have any public comment? I apologize. Okay, what's that? Go ahead.
Oh, yes, we do.
We do?
We do.
Yeah. Who might that be?
Mr. Holmes.
Mr. Holmes, you have 3 minutes. Good afternoon.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be more brief. Thank you. My name is Rick Homans. I'm the CEO of the Tampa Bay Partnership. Mr. Chairman, HART board members, want to thank you for taking the time today for hitting what looks like the pause button for a moment on the critical task of searching for a new CEO. We appreciate your willingness to spend the additional time to reflect and deliberate on this process to make sure we have the best possible outcome for the community. Obviously, this is a transformative moment in the history of HART, Hillsborough County, and Tampa Bay. The residents of Hillsborough County passed a historic sales tax referendum in November, providing the financial resources to HART to build out a world-class transportation system, multimodal. The Tampa Bay Partnership was proud to provide significant and early financial support to the campaign, and we are deeply invested in the outcome. As you move forward, the selection of a new CEO is arguably the most important decision this board will make. Commissioner Overman framed the issue eloquently in her January 17th letter. HART must hire someone with significant administrative and management experience, but also with the planning experience to expand the agency with priorities of transit-oriented development, inclusionary service, and multimodal skills, including rail and BRT. This is a tall order, and it requires you as a board to be willing to take whatever steps necessary to ensure that you have the leadership in place to tackle the enormous challenge that lies ahead. My only purpose in coming before you today is to encourage you to set the bar as high as possible and to urge you not to settle for anything less than the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Anyone else wish to address the board? Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Seward. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last week, Mr. Moser and I had an opportunity to talk on several occasions pertaining to a series of communications that had been provided to the board and public communications through editorials in the Tampa Bay Times concerning, one, the current applicant pool, and two, the overall process for looking at our CEO, our new CEO position. So in your packet, you have the multiple letters and the letters to the editor that were provided. It was decided at that time, Mr. Moser made the recommendation that instead of waiting to the February the 1st meeting when we had all 3 candidates brought in for an interview to deliberate and discuss these communications, that we should have a special board meeting in the interim to, one, discuss the current process, 2, the current applicant pool, and 3, what the desires of this board are moving forward. For that discussion, Mr. Moser has come in to town and is going to provide an overview of where we are in the process and to talk a little bit about a lot of the recommendations that the community and Commissioner Overman made in the communications, and what that would mean to the process and what it would mean to opening up a pool to a greater number of applicants if that was the case. So that is the reason for our special board meeting today. Thank you for making the opportunity to come and have this discussion prior to moving forward.
Okay, Mr. Moser, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Miller, and thank you, Mr. Stewart, for your comments. I won't recap all of that, but obviously over the last several days I've had the opportunity to see the letters and the articles that have come out and played out, and in reflection on that myself, I thought this might be a good opportunity to take a moment and just have a discussion about where we are, how we've gotten to where we are today, and how you want to move forward. So I put together a brief presentation just so you could visually see, and what I tried to do was address a couple of areas that came up both through the articles and the letters and some of the concerns I had heard from various board members, and that way I can try to address all of the discussion points and also give you a sense of the current state of the market right now and in terms of available talent and what that market looks like. So, it's okay with you. So I thought it would be helpful just to take a moment to reflect on how we got to where we are today from a timing standpoint. And some of you I know were on the board about a year or so ago, and some of you are new to the board. So I thought it was a good opportunity for not only for us to talk about this, but for also for everybody here in the audience and watching on video to be able to see this as well. As you're aware, Ms. Egan departed sometime back in November or December of 2017. The HART reached out to my company and to me to ask me if I would be willing and able to help recruit a new CEO and to replace Ms. Egan. That time, the end of December, early January, we started. I had some initial conversations with the organization, some of the board members, and I believe you had a board meeting in January and ultimately decided at that point in time to take a pause on doing a recruitment and to ask Mr. Stewart to serve as interim CEO. So we put the search on hold effectively at that point in time. HART reached back out to me in August and said that the board was interested in re-engaging the process and starting the search up again. We went through the procedures to do so, and I dialed in by phone for your September board meeting, and I think we had a conversation, I believe it was an afternoon or evening meeting, and we had a conversation about timing and when it was appropriate to start the recruitment process. During that phone conversation, there was some discussion related to the referendum and the tax vote that was coming up on November 6th. I had made a recommendation that from my standpoint, it didn't make sense to start a process and stop it, but to do one fluid process from start to finish. That would be, candidates would be more interested in a process like that because once their names are out there in the public, if they're holding other jobs, it puts them in a moment of limbo. So I think the board ultimately decided for that reason, and also so we had some better understanding of which direction the referendum vote was going to go, we would hold off doing the recruitment until after that vote took place. So the decision was made that we would officially kick off and begin the recruitment on November 6th. And that's what we did. So in terms of doing that on November 6th, I did two things. One was I had prepared advertising that reflected what you were looking for in a CEO. And I also started doing direct outreach. But that did not start taking place until, candidly, November 7th. All the advertising went up in the afternoon of the 6th. And my direct outreach really started the morning of the 7th. So in terms of the outreach, there was two approaches to this. One was what I'll call the public awareness, the passive outreach. We posted the job position description on HART's website. So anybody who visited the website could see that this position was available and they could apply to it. My contact information was provided there. We also posted it with APTA, and APTA is the American Public Transportation Association. It's the largest association of public transit agencies in North America. All agencies around the country that operate bus, rail, air transit, and other services are members of APTA, and there are over 1,500 agency members and hundreds of thousands of employees that are members of APTA through that. We also posted it through Transit Talent, which is a news blast that goes out to transit executives. It's a widely accepted and subscribed to publication. It's something free that all transit executives subscribe to. So they get daily notifications of what's going on in the industry and also what jobs are available. And then we also posted it with COMTO, which is the Conference of Minority Transportation Officers, and WTS, which is Women in Transportation Seminars. So based on the direction that I was provided from the board that you were looking for transit executives, we used those resources, which are the most widely accepted places to advertise a job like this, where industry leaders, executives would be looking to see what opportunities are available. The other thing I did during this time, over a 60-day period, was I directly reached out to CEOs around the industry. And my approach in doing that was twofold. One was to reach out to people I thought might be interested in the job. but also reach out to people who may not be interested in the job, but might have recommendations of candidates who would be very good for the job based on what you were looking for. And one of the things that was helpful in terms of waiting until November 6th was the tax referendum had taken place. The vote had passed favorably in terms of the tax initiative. So when I went out there and I started talking to folks, it was a conversation about this is a game-changing opportunity for the Tampa Bay region. This is something that's going to change the landscape of Tampa for the foreseeable, candidly forever. It is probably one of the single biggest projects that's going to take place in the United States over the next several years. And this is an opportunity to come into an agency and make a mark in the industry and candidly, an opportunity that you may never have again in your career as a CEO, because these opportunities around the country don't come up all the time. So that was the type of conversation I had with candidates. Just moving forward, we had it posted for 60 days. I was doing my outreach for 60 days. I talked to candidates. People submitted their resumes to me. I reviewed those resumes. I benchmarked it against the qualifications, which I'll talk about in a moment, and identified what I believe to be the strongest 9 candidates that I brought to the ad hoc committee that was formed on the board. The ad hoc committee reviewed those resumes, ultimately selected 4 of those candidates, and you may remember that we had decided to have each of those 4 candidates do video interviews to be prepared for the next ad hoc committee meeting, and we have prepared 3 questions for each of those candidates to respond to. Those interviews were reviewed by the members of the ad hoc committee. We held a meeting, and ultimately it was decided that 3 of the candidates would move forward in the process to be finalists, and that was the recommendation of the ad hoc committee to consider those 3 finalist candidates by the full board for the CEO position. When I reflect back on what I was talking to candidates about and what I was looking for in candidates' resumes, I mentioned to you how I expressed and how I described the position to candidates. Obviously, I talked more about the agency. I talked about the operational service you have today. Candidly, I talked about the challenge to the tax referendum as well, and that there's unforeseen risks. You just don't know what's going to happen with that yet, and that's something people should be aware of. It's my job to help manage expectations and make folks aware of what the opportunity, but also what potential limitations there may be in the position. So that was part of what I did. But also, as I evaluated and looked at candidates, there were fundamental characteristics or skills I was looking for in any CEO candidate that applied for the job. And that included leadership skills, experience managing teams, working in a large, diverse, complex organization, leadership skills, leading initiatives, whether it was through professional development, their actual day-to-day job and things like that, and their interpersonal skills, their ability to speak, communicate, write effectively, talk to folks, not just their own staff members, but people above them, people outside of the community, and being able to advise like that as well. And then I was also looking for some additional qualifications, and some of these were in the job description. One of the qualifications that was required was a bachelor's degree. The candidates must have possessed a bachelor's degree. Candidly, in transit, there are still a few transit executives out there in the industry that began their careers and came right out of high school or whatnot and jumped right into work for whatever reason it was, maybe to pay bills for their family or whatnot, and never went and seeked a college degree. And some of those people have been very successful and have risen the ranks to become CEOs in our industry. And you're seeing more and more executives that have college degrees, but in transit there still are a few, I'd say a handful of CEOs out there that don't have college degrees today. But that was a requirement that the board had set forth. There was also, in the job description discussion, and we have had discussion with the board about experience in public transit or transportation, and how important that was given the operation you're running, but also the future of what you're about to undertake. And you may remember we had a conversation in between, and as I was going about doing the recruitment, we had a conversation on the phone, or I dialed in on the phone, where we talked about salary expectations. And I expressed that it was important for me, as I was seeked and recruited candidates, to better understand what HART's board was comfortable paying a CEO. And we had a bit of discussion about that. There was discussion and there was some recommendations to have a base salary at around $250,000, and I think ultimately the board settled on a salary range of approximately not to exceed $220,000. So those were the criteria I used as I went out and tried to identify and recruit candidates. One thing I wanted to talk about, and I think we did talk about this in several of the meetings, but it was fairly quick. We moved through it quickly, but was the current state of the transit industry. And I think that it's important to reflect on what's going on in the transit industry, and this is not so much about HART as it is just what's happening in the industry. And what you've seen over the last several years is a transformation of executive talent. You've seen several of the senior executives who have been practicing for 20 or 30 years start to retire and move either into private practice or into retirement. And you've seen more and more agencies looking for CEOs. And so what I did here was I listed all of the agencies that have either gone through or are going through currently CEO or COO recruitments around the country. And what's interesting about that list is many of those are agencies that are multimodal that have gone through capital expansion programs. And so as I go out and do recruiting, when I look at that list, those agencies themselves are going through those recruitments right now or have just gone through those recruitments. And as a result of that, the executives that are there are not interested in the position, or they don't even have an executive in those positions. They've got an interim much like yourself. So I think it's important to note that in a lot of these regions and jurisdictions that there is a search undergoing at the moment, or there was just one recently. You know, over the last week, I read the letters. I reflected on the discussion in the letters and in the paper about looking for a transit CEO, someone with transit experience who's done something similar to what you're about to embark upon. And so I did a little diligence over the last week, and I did some outreach to some CEOs in the industry. And I list the cities such as, because I talked to about 5 or 6 CEOs, and I didn't think it was fair because they're not candidates, and it wouldn't be fair to them for me to put their names out there or the cities they work in. But when you look at this list, these are the types of cities who have gone through transformative transportation projects. Dallas, Denver, Austin's going through some, Phoenix. And so I reached out to some of these executives and I said, you know, if HART was to open this job back up and they were interested in looking for a CEO like yourself, what would it be, what would it take to get you to be interested in this job, if at all possible? And these are folks that are not looking for jobs. These are folks that are exceeding and doing very well in their jobs and have a lot of support from their boards and their communities. But I reached out to them and they took my call and we had this conversation. And, you know, candidly, there was some, they pointed out, the first thing that every single one of them pointed out was the limitation that you face, and it's something you obviously can't control, which is the Sunshine Law in the state of Florida. And so I asked them to expand upon that a little bit, and each one said to me, you know, look, I report to anywhere from a 5-member board to a 15-member board. And if it got out there that I was one of 2, 3, or 5 candidates in a process, it's eventually, with today's day and age of social media and whatnot, it's going to get back to my board members. And the question is going to come up, how committed are you to our organization? And are you really willing to stay here and do what we need you to do and maintain the confidence of our communities? So to them, being in a CEO position where they're in a board, they report to a board of directors where they have multiple stakeholders, they didn't feel comfortable that they could go through a process where their name was publicly out there. And candidly, I've done searches in Orlando and Jacksonville and Miami and Pinellas, and I've heard these same sorts of comments through other searches. So it's not unique to HART or this process. The other thing I heard was just geography, and that's not that there's anything wrong with the Tampa Bay region, it's just that that's not where their families are located, and that's not where they could locate. So some of them said, look, even beyond the Sunshine Law, geography, I wouldn't move to Tampa. It's just not possible or feasible. Some of them said, I'm not interested in changing a job. No matter what, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't attract me to this. And then the ones who said, look, if circumstances changed, the salary was really a limitation. And so I asked the question, what would it take salary-wise for someone to make it competitive for the type of organization you're in? And when you look at the list of organizations or cities up there, if you were to do some diligence, and all of this information is public information, the salaries for these cities are in the mid-200s to the mid-300s. And so most of them said, look, for it to be worth my while to go through a process like this and put my name out there publicly, the salary would have to be somewhere in the $300,000 to $400,000 range, give or take, the base salary. And some of them said, you know, whether that's based on bonus structures or not, that some were more willing to be open to an idea of a bonus structure, but others said, look, I'm already making $340,000. It would take 10 or 20% more for me to be willing to give up my current opportunity and move. So that's some of the feedback I got over the last week as I reached out to some of these CEOs in some of these cities. So with that, I thought that would be helpful. I tried to think about what questions you may have based on what I read and wanted to share that information with you and then open it back up to have a conversation, answer any other questions you have, and talk about where we move from here.
I have Mr. McLean who wants to ask a question.
Yeah, first, Greg, thank you for doing that. That's very helpful, and it's kind of along the lines we discussed. As most of you know, I also said, hey, do we need to pause? Do we need to relook at the process we're going through? Do we need to rethink HART prior to the referendum passing and HART after. And so, so I'm glad to see so many folks here. My only real question, Greg, and I think other questions will not necessarily come out of this, but I think we'll have more questions. But when we did our search, initial search, and that job posting was out there, did it speak to a referendum change? Did it speak to operating budgets doubling within a year, literally? Did it speak to that? And the only thing I'm getting at is, did we miss somebody out there outside of your calls that might have said, wait a minute, this is something I want to bite into and try to go after? And that's my only question there. How was that position solicitation structured, and was it structured in a way that says this is really a change versus this is a CEO position that was there under the old HART, so to speak?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think that the way it was advertised was using the job description you had, and the way that Compto and WTS and those resources that I mentioned earlier allow you to publish it is to take the job description you have and literally post it on their sites. So the job description itself, I don't think addresses the fact that there was a successful tax referendum, because we didn't change it from that point in time. So yes, my outreach did do that. I think that, candidly, the day after the tax referendum, those sites, if you look at those sites, they had articles literally covering this. So I think that, from my perspective, the answer to the question about the direct advertisement is no. The direct advertisement, I do not believe, actually said that. But I think there was enough information, enough media coverage, and candidly, the entire industry has been watching this. This is something that didn't happen overnight. This is something that's been going on for 10 or 20 years in the Tampa Bay region with multiple attempts at this. So this was a high-profile thing. This was something that APTA covered and certainly made national news within the transit industry.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Mosley? Mr. Linda is recognized.
Just a brief follow-up question to that last answer. Is it safe to say that the top talent, given what you just said, was fully aware in that 60-day period of the opportunity in Tampa?
I believe so. Yeah, I really do believe so.
Any other questions, Mr.
I have a question.
Mr.
What, and I appreciate all this extra work and diligence, and I think it's, I appreciate the chairman's leadership to give us the chance to have this conversation, because I think having done 3 governor's transitions, 2 presidential transitions, the hardest part to get people over is the sunshine. And if you've never done that, in trying to attract and explain the process in Florida, the chairman knows that from his time in Tallahassee, it is the hardest thing to get candidates to understand. I did university searches, State Board of Chairman searches of education, and so it is a challenge. My concern, and that's why I'm happy we're having this opportunity, is that, as we all know in life, it's all about signaling. And why we think Tampa, and we know Tampa is a very special place with a really dynamic opportunity here in terms of this investment of funding, with that comes a big deal of responsibility and a lot more not a lot more transparency, but a lot more opportunity to really help transform Tampa Bay. We do not want to be building on a platform that already makes people a little nervous with the special sunshine that we all love about Florida, than to be schizophrenic in our approach to try to attract talent and to be embarrassed, frankly. I mean, I don't want to bring people in if we're not all assigned or ascribed to, we think this is the best pool we can get, because the worst thing we could do is bring in talented individuals who have responded, interview them, and then go back out to market and be like, okay, you have to go through a public process. We hired a professional. This is what they do full time nationally, just so we all understand that. And personal agendas aside, we have to be professional in this process of finding the right person for the right seat. And I do believe that. So this was not in the plan, and it takes leadership to do this. And I know you heard from a lot of different people, none of us, but I really, this is a very important meeting for us to put our issues on the table, figure out what we're going to do. If we're going to go back to the market, understand what's in the market, what's happening in the market, and either make some changes to our current ask or go forward with the candidates that we have. I have my opinion, I'm not going to share it at this time, but I cannot tell you enough, having done, I don't want to say hundreds, but probably close to 100 searches in Florida, convincing people to move to this state and the value of the tax benefit and the value of, I mean, you used to hear me when I was up in Tallahassee trying to get teachers, superintendents. It is a struggle. It is a challenge, and you cannot underestimate that. So I think we need to be thoughtful today. We need to be resolute in what we decide, and we need to go forward with a plan with some integrity so we get the right talent for this really exciting opportunity.
I think we're now in discussion what's next steps. Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you very much for explaining and bringing so much to the table to help us understand the markets that we're competing with now, as well as the job description. That was helpful because that all happened before I got here. I think my question to you was in your, and the reason I sort of posed some questions about where we are in this process is to get a handle on the number of individuals, not who, but the number of individuals that may have been excellent candidates given the job description that may have shied away from our decision to set a salary cap. Because if there are individuals out there that would consider it based on your conversation about, what would it take, it sounds like we may not have attracted individuals that were capable, and yet we set a level that wasn't competitive when we are competing with so many other markets. Could you give us a little idea about maybe how many people, or if there were candidates that you knew would be excellent, but they wouldn't ever accept what we were using as a range for compensation?
Yeah, so I think that within the salary range you set, you have the best candidates in front of you, and you reviewed the best candidates available. I think if you were to go back and reflect on that salary, moving it by $20,000 or $30,000 probably wouldn't change the pool of candidates dramatically. I think that, as I pointed out when I talked to some of those folks in the industry, some of those existing CEOs, that if you were to move it substantially, almost double it in some cases, that you might get other candidates. Now, I had hypothetical conversations, right? So these were not, look, I'm asking you to apply for this job. It was a hypothetical what ifs, and it was, candidly, some of my conversation was, what if I could do away with the Sunshine Law? Which obviously I can't, but it was a conversation to get to that next level of what would it take from a salary standpoint. So if you're asking, if we change the salary, let's say to $350,000, could I go get you another candidate? Maybe, but I don't know because I didn't have those conversations to say, look, if they do that, would you be willing to apply? Because it wasn't fair to the process. It wasn't fair to them to put them on the spot like that. So it would be requiring to go back. And I don't know for sure if I would get someone else. I think that my guess is at some of those salary levels, it would be motivating enough because of money. And then the question I'd have for you, are they coming here for the money or are they coming here for the opportunity?
That was my concern as well.
Hold on, wait. Councilman Suarez, recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I like the way that Ms. Shanahan made it plain, as she always does. She does a great job of actually presenting her experience in a way that lets us think about what we're trying to do here. A couple of questions that I have, the ramifications of two things. One, raising the salary bottom. Again, it's not a cap, but a bottom that we would raise up. And then instead, if we went out and said that the minimum salary was going to be, let's say, $300,000, just going to throw out a number for no other reason than for discussion purposes, and said we want to include some other folks that we might be able to get in here. And again, I don't know if legally we can not have to put a cap as to what our salary range is. I don't think we necessarily have to. And said it's negotiated afterwards. Because the biggest issue that I had in my mind when we had the first meeting talking about the salary was not that to set the salary then. We have the power as a board to set the salary after we have selected our candidate. To me, that's much more important than having a salary already advertised, because it does, I think, narrow the scope. What are the ramifications for us outside of this boardroom in the industry if we open it up again after we've raised the salary cap as opposed to what we have now? What do you think? And based on your expertise.
Yeah, and I'm not a transit executive professional, so I don't run an agency, but I'll give you some thoughts as to what I think possible ramifications are. I think one is, assuming we open it back up for a process that is open and fair to everyone and whatnot, you know, again, I come back to the what if question. What if there's one more candidate, or there's no more candidates?
Right.
And you've now opened the process back up, and perhaps that message you've sent to the candidates you have right now is, are you really the ones we wanted? You know, and then you're stuck with, okay, we didn't find anyone else that was any better, perhaps. And yet, they're kind of questioning, do I have the confidence in the board and the support of the community and whatnot? That's one thing. I think the second thing is, and I would reflect on this at board, is what kind of precedent does that set for HART as an organization, for staff, for unions and things like that? I mean, I have to think that those sorts of things have ramifications as well. Another thing, and some folks had asked me, well, what do you think about the idea of keeping the salary at $220 and having large bonuses? And I think that we see that very often in private sector, and there's some public sector organizations that have that. Airports, for example, sometimes do those sorts of things. I've seen that in transportation. I think Salt Lake City in Utah is a perfect example of that, and I've mentioned that to a couple of folks. If you look back at what happened there, they incentivized their executive leadership team to deliver on time and under budget. And as a result of that, the team did it. They accomplished it, and they got things in terms of preparation for the Olympics on time and under budget. But as time wore on and people started to reflect on it and say, wow, you've got executives there that made bonuses of $100,000 or whatever it was, and made these large salaries that are candidly out of line with the rest of the transit industry. It started to put political pressure on the agency. And again, I'm sharing this all as public information. If you read the newspaper, you'll see that it literally raised this to the awareness of the governor of Utah, and ended up dissolving the board of the transit agency and reconstituting a new board, and they've rebuilt the entire executive leadership team. So I think that there are various things that could potentially happen by doing those sorts of things, and perhaps I'm not thinking of every one of them, but those are some of the things I think that you should consider.
Yeah, and you know, for me, you know, salary is obviously one part of this, and the Sunshine Law is probably a bigger part of this, only because am I going to expose myself to other agencies when here in Florida and not know what the kind of salary is worth my while to go forward? And I think that that's kind of what you laid out for us. It's a much more difficult proposition for somebody out there in a larger agency, or even someone that wants to go from another number 2 or number 3 position in a large agency to say, I'm going to take on the challenge of remaking this area's transit system, because now I have the money to do it. But I also want to be compensated for having that kind of vision and being able to operate it in a very efficient and effective way. I mean, to me, I'm, you know, a lot of the letters that we got, some of them were from agencies that are, I have to say, Johnny-come-latelys when we start to see what the timeline has been. As far as I know, and Chair maybe knows more than I do, but they never reached out to me or, in my mind, any of the other board members to discuss this as a particular issue, and meeting time frame and the number of candidates. They never opined in my mind that what was going on was the wrong process. I mean, when you do a public process, it's much more difficult. I hope that we will, and I agree with Ms. Shanahan, we have to be resolute in terms of what we're going to do. I think that we should have a robust discussion about it. I'm under the understanding that if we do open it up, we may not get any more additional folks, because now that some people are going to be gun shy because of this particular decision. You know, I saw the candidates that we have, the 3 remaining. I think that we can go forward, but I'm in favor of being unanimous with the board so that we have a united front going forward, whatever the decision is. And I want you all to know that my opinion is that, you know, we started this process a long time ago, we stopped it, and then we started it again. I don't want to do the same thing a second time. I guess it would be a third time. I want us to try and get to some resolution at this point, especially since I think the court case, Mr. Smith might know, I think we have a court date in May, if I'm not mistaken, last I heard. So, and without getting to the merits of it, I just...
We have multiple court dates, but that's when the final summary judgments are set. Yes, sir.
Okay,
Let me say,
thank you, Chair.
You asked a question as to when did I start hearing from
Yeah.
organizations or individuals, not before the ad hoc committee made its decision on the 3. That's
Right.
when I started hearing things. No one then contacted me at all during the process until after the ad hoc committee had made its decision on those 3.
And that was my assumption, Chair, so thank you.
Ms. Melendez, you recommend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, Councilman Suarez, you asked for unanimity, and I can't, based upon the information I have right now, I can't promise that I can't promise unanimity. But I am willing to have a discussion.
You can't promise what? I didn't.
He would get a unanimous vote.
It's just something to consider. That's
Sure. Well, I have some serious concerns, and however, I do want to, the folks that have reached out to us, and including the articles, they're all stakeholders, and I value all opinions, and I've looked at everything, and I also spoke with Mr. Moser. I just want to remind, since some of our board members are new, not only have we kind of paused the process at one point, but we've also already been through a pool of applicants. It was a one applicant pool, but we went through that process as well. So the concern that I have is, and I'm not on the ad hoc committee, but I did review the candidates, and I think they're fine candidates, as I think Mr. Moser characterized them as, fine candidates for the range that we put forth. But I think what will help me is, and if Mr. Moser, if I can ask you a very direct question, and I think you may have answered this question, but I guess I just want to make sure I understand. During the process of your outreach and your communications, would you say that, or did anyone specifically vocalize to you that, Greg, if this, I saw the ad, but if this range were higher, I'd be submitting my resume, but because it's not, I've got to hold off. And if you did receive any statements like that, was it 1? Was it 5? Did anyone specifically reference, and this is just out of my range?
Yep, yeah. So to answer your question directly, yes, one person did.
One
person during that process specifically sent me an email saying that if their salary was at least, they believed that for an agency of what you're about to go through, this was their personal opinion, that if the salary were $325,000 that they would consider applying, a minimum of $325,000.
Okay.
And they said to me, now, I won't share who that was. It is a CEO in the industry from a system that is larger than you are today, but probably not larger where you're going to be in a year from now. Mm-hmm. And prior to that job, they were at a much smaller system in a much smaller community running what I'll consider more to be a rural type of and not an urban type of transportation system.
Thank you, and if I may just follow up, thank you, Mr. Moser. So, and Mike, back to your comment, I don't disagree with you wanting unanimity, yeah. But that answer right there helps me tremendously, because what it says to me is, because I'm fully willing to admit if we missed something, if there wasn't due consideration, and I was part of that, then I'll admit, wow, we missed an opportunity, even one. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to diminish our current candidates all the way back to a certain someone, and because I value them greatly, and that I may comment further, but that's all I have for now. Thanks.
Councilman Sister, recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too echo some of the sentiments from Ms. Shanahan, Commissioner Shanahan. We have to be very careful. We have to be diligent. We cannot keep whipping people around like this. I spent the last decade of my career in recruitment and in HR, and you just can't keep doing that to people. We've started, we've stopped. Now I wasn't on the board back then. I wasn't even here for the discussion on the salary ranges. But reading the minutes, I found it quite disjointed, and I really couldn't tell where it was going at times until the final vote. And I think this sends a bad message out to the public, our constituencies, as well as to the industry leaders in other parts of the country. And I believe that makes it more difficult to bring people into the area. Sunshine is an issue. I know darn well that when I was in business, if I was recruited by somebody else, I did not want that getting out, because somebody's going to say, wait a minute, we have a problem here, and we're going to hurt people in the future. Another issue is the current cast of applicants. I believe our next CEO is one of those three. I personally do. I don't know which one it is yet, because I have some questions that I want to ask. Looking forward to next week to the opportunity to ask them. And there was a question that you had put out to everybody the other day was, where do you agree with the 100 days, 1 year, and 5 year? Well, yeah, I agree with that question, but we got to look at if we prevail on the suit or if we lose the suit, because that changes everything dramatically. I mean, it's apocalyptic if we don't, what you're going to do. So you bring somebody in here with the expectation of paying them $300,000 or $250,000 or whatever, we got a problem with that if we don't prevail and come May at the end of the suit. So I think you can tell where I feel. I think we need to move forward. I think we've whiplashed enough people in this issue. We don't look effective. We don't look like we believe in what we're doing, and I think we need to go for it. And you know, at the end of the day, after we've interviewed these individuals, if they're not the people we want, or if they're not the person that we want to be sitting in the CEO seat, then we start over. Not now, it's too early. This is the discussion we have next week, not this week. But I understand, I appreciate the opportunity. I think it's important that we get this out in the open, and you know, and the additional effort that you put in, Mr. Moser, in this information and reaching out. We got to know what's going on. We can't operate from a vacuum. But I think we're doing ourselves a huge disservice if we start over at this point. That's my opinion.
Mr. Hart, you recognize.
Yes, sir. Thank you. First, thanks to Director Shanahan for, I think, putting my thoughts into words more eloquently than I could, but I really agree with what you said, and I do think that with this decision there, that it would be nice. I mean, I guess the chairman's scheduled 2 hours here. Hopefully it won't take that, but we hopefully will get to unanimity. So I'd like to add some context to what Director Shanahan said, and that, you know, teams are built in many ways, and you have to look at, you know, at what you have to determine what you need. And, you know, we're fortunate here to be a very well-run, medium-sized transit agency that by most metrics, when benchmarked against other agencies, efficiently run. So, and we have a strong individual in Mr. Seward, and the, you know, master, a good part of what we need to accomplish here is an expansion of our back-of-house. And so we know that he'll be very capable of doing that, bringing already a deep understanding of the agency and its context in the community. So I, you know, just want to offer that out. I think as we look at this list of candidates that, you know, and then we look at the agency that we're going to plug this person into, that's important. And then I have one question, so hopefully not a curveball, but if, short of reopening the process, but if there are board members who would like to dig deeper into the pool of applicants that you've brought, you know, beyond what was recommended by the ad hoc committee, you know, what are your thoughts on, you know, granting final interviews to 1 or 2 more candidates on the list if there was a you know, consensus from the board that they wanted to do that?
So I think, first, that I'm not speaking with a legal opinion. I don't see a reason. I mean, there's a group of candidates applied for a job, why you couldn't ask one to come in. I turned to legal counsel and asked that question, but beyond that, if that wasn't an issue, this is your process. This is your decision and what you want to do. I can tell you that from my standpoint, I contacted all of those other candidates and said that the board had moved forward. It's public, it's out there. They know who the 3 finalists are. So would they be interested? It's possible. I'd have to reach back out to them and say, look, there's a consensus from the board. There's a majority of the board would like to ask you to come in and consider interviewing for this. So I suppose I also reflect, you know, just what sort of message that sends. And I'm not sure, there's probably a lot of different messages that sends. It sends it to the candidates you have right now. It sends it to those people who didn't get selected by the ad hoc, but by the full board. And so I'm not sure I have an opinion on what all those messages are, but I'm sure it sends some sort of message out there as well.
Ms. Shanahan, you recognize.
I just had one other question, following up on Mr. Melendez's question. If you raised or deleted you said there were 2 qualifiers that, you know, if you went back, it would be salary and an academic platform. Would that have made a difference in terms of the number of candidates?
So if we were to go back out and drop the educational requirement, I believe there was at the time one candidate or one potential candidate who was interested in applying for the job, and I had a conversation with that candidate about the minimum qualifications, which there was a bachelor's degree requirement, and that person did not have a bachelor's degree. So they ultimately did not put their name forward and apply. So I'd go back to what sort of opening of the process would we have to do to be fair to everybody out there, so that not only could this individual have an opportunity to apply, but anyone else who wanted to apply could do so. And also, I don't know if that person's still interested today. I'd have to go back.
Was that person a CEO?
That person was a CEO.
Of a like-sized institution?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Moser, for the overview. It was very helpful. We've talked a lot about how much a CEO is requesting or would like to make. What is the salary of a like-size agency normally?
So I'll reflect on a couple things. One is I did the search for Austin, Texas for Capital Metro about a year ago. And interesting, if you go back and you look at that, Texas has sunshine laws, but the way their sunshine laws work, and actually I had to work with the Attorney General's office, and we were able to protect names throughout the process. It was not, for the benefit of getting the best candidates and protecting the confidentiality of the candidates, we were able to protect the names throughout the process. I think after the fact, the media was allowed to have access to the names of who those candidates were once the decision was made, which allowed for them to have a stronger pool of candidates. So when you look at the people who made that finalist list, the final four, one thing interesting to note, and they're going through a similar sort of structure where they're going to go through a massive potential growth and transformation in terms of mobility in the Austin region, and that's what the board was looking for. The four finalist candidates were not CEOs in the industry right now, and the candidate they selected was a gentleman who had 15 months, about 15, 18 months of executive experience at Boston, and then served as APTA, which I mentioned earlier, as the Public Transportation Association's head of membership and head of operations, so to speak. And he's been there, so up-and-comer, again, another up-and-coming star. Their second runner-up was a woman who was from a much smaller system in Arizona, and actually since has gotten the job to be their CEO in their agency out there. She was the deputy. The salary that they ultimately negotiated, and I'd have to look back in my notes, but I believe the base salary was somewhere in the $280,000 to $285,000 range. And they also offered a bonus, and I don't remember what the bonus was. It was probably somewhere between 5% and 20%. And then they offered deferred comp of about $50,000 or so. So when you look at the total comp package of a similar type of system that is really a bus agency right now, and they've got commuter rail, they've got a small little commuter rail operation. That's sort of the salary of what Capital Metro in Austin was paying. I could talk about a few others out there, but for an agency sort of similar, going through similar types of things, that was what they were paying.
Thank you.
Mr. McCann, you recognize.
Yeah, I'd like to offer a few comments which may be sort of out of sync with what I'm hearing here, but I feel pretty strongly that. I want to start out by saying that I don't want this to reflect on the existing group of candidates, because I think that they're all qualified to do this job. But having said that, I think based on what I'm hearing about what we offered as the salary range and what the expectations are in the industry for top flight people, I think we fell short. I don't want to say we made a mistake, but I think we were unduly conservative with that salary range. I mean, we need to keep in mind, we're not obliged to give somebody the top dollar in that range if we don't feel that that's appropriate given whatever candidate we zero in on. So you can make that range higher and potentially attract a larger group of candidates. And that's really all I'm advocating. I don't want to make a motion now because I think there's a lot more discussion that probably needs to take place here. But I would encourage all the existing applicants to reapply if we were to open it back up with a higher salary range. I don't think we're being unfair to those people because it's possible they could wind up with a higher salary. We're just taking the time to make sure that we'd be giving this board every opportunity to see the possibilities that are out there. This is
probably the most important decision that this board is going to make, at least in the foreseeable future. And I think it doesn't really harm anything right now for us to just extend this out, open it up, and see what other opportunities there are for us out there. So with that, I'll shut up.
Commissioner Kemp, be recognized.
Thank you. I want to thank you for the presentation. I also think, Director Shanahan, your remarks at the beginning, I think, are important for us to recognize about Sunshine, and in light of this, how this board is viewed, and your remarks to Councilman, in terms of the industry and people applying and looking at how this board has dealt with this situation. Initially, we were going to end this search sometime before November. I actually voted against us doing that back in the summertime. I thought it was premature that we should do it before a sales tax vote, before we had information. But we voted to go ahead and have this search completed initially. At another board meeting, I raised the date, the issue of how this was dated, and said that we should do it at least after the referendum so that we have some sense. And it was, I think, supported by one extra vote at the time, but I really was looking for some kind of prudence in this, and very thoughtful process moving ahead, because I felt like it was just, you know, without really the protocol we needed to be thinking about it. Then, after we started the process, I think, if my memory serves me right, and it might not, that you said, what do we have on the original? We didn't have a number on the original job advertisement. So you were asking because you thought it would be a good thing for us to put a number to it, and a number that we, you know, made far higher than what we're paying now, or what we have been paying. It went from, I think, something like 170 to 220, so like a $50,000 raise at that time. I remember asking what similar larger systems than ours will be, and one you mentioned, if my memory again serves me correct, is Broward. Didn't you tell what was the salary in Broward?
I'd have to go back and look. I mean,
because you put off a list, and when you said Broward, you know, which was it would be a bigger agency than we have even after the tax and operations. And I remember suggesting the 220 based on Broward systems, you know, what they were compensating, and it seemed a good compensation at the time for, you know, attracting to this system. Now we're learning more about kind of, I think more due diligence on our part would have been good prior to this, but it wasn't done. Now we have a list of people who have put their names forward. I think we have some really, I would agree, I think we have some really, really strong candidates here. And as you pointed out, I'm not sure why the focus is so much on we have to have a CEO from a bigger organization. It doesn't make, that's not exactly what I look for. In terms of that, and I think we have some people with some great backgrounds and experience. I actually think that there's one person on the other list, I'm not suggesting we go back to it, but one person that was overlooked that could have been very, very strong, but that person wasn't brought forward. But at any rate, I think we have some great people here. I think we really, if we move forward and we don't want to do this, and maybe we can rethink it, but I think right now is not the time to be doing this, to be just move through with this. It's really been, you know, I think the other thing we also don't know right now is we do have the lawsuit, so it could be a while. That could make some applicants stand back. I'm also wondering about if we did some huge, enormous raise. I don't know what that would be, but when we're had our bus drivers in here, very angry at where their salaries have been. I know that they've been underpaid for years, but I think that would be a reflection also on how we're moving forward, especially I think when we have some really good candidates with some amazing background that I think we should explore and bring in, and then if we don't think we have someone, then maybe move forward then. But I really think that this would be unwise and reflect on the integrity of this board, and especially when it's such a public process, for us not to move forward at this time.
Before I'm calling our next speaker, our General Counsel wants to say something. Mr. Smith.
Yes, sir. I wanted to indicate that I have a 3 o'clock conference call with the entire defense team on the transit surtax. It's a very important conference call. I would like to excuse myself at 3 o'clock, and Ms. Barron will sit in. I will then return. I'll take the call here locally. I don't know how long it will be, but we're basically getting together, continuing our strategy with litigation. Okay. This board is free to take whatever action it chooses to take. There's no legal constraint. You can move forward with your candidates. You can start over again. You can look at other candidates. So there's no constraint on what this board can choose to do. The ad hoc committee has made a recommendation. You're free to follow it. You're free not to follow it. And I will leave it shortly before 3, but I will be back as soon as that call's over.
Ms. Melendez is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Briefly, I've been involved in the recruiting process in my career, and it's tough. And for those, I know we've all probably been recruited at one time. But if you haven't participated in the recruiting process, we're seeing it on display now, and it's so much easier when you work for a single company. You just move through this like lightning. I don't think we necessarily missed something. I just wanted to note that this is a process. Information comes to light, things change, things are dynamic. One of the things that makes a difference, or that I've heard today that makes a difference for me, like a serious difference, is the fact that there was a candidate that you heard from, Mr. Moser, who's a CEO and was disqualified because they didn't have a bachelor's degree. And I point to that because that's new information for me. Now, based upon what Mr. Moser has said, there are really like 2 candidates out there that potentially could enrich our list, right? I mean, based upon what we know, 2 candidates. Now, there may be more, but sharing all of the concerns that Councilman Schisler expressed, if you don't mind, I share those concerns, and I share the concern of maintaining our credibility as a board, and I believe in diligence. So, with that being said, if we were to, with Mr. Moser's consultation, look at the salary again, because it sounds like there's an opportunity there, given that one candidate, and we were to look at some type of exception or even the qualification in whole as far as the bachelor's degree, I would be willing to talk about an alternate option other than the pool of candidates we have today. To ensure that if there's a CEO out there that doesn't have a college degree and has done incredible things, then I would love to see that resume. So, thank you.
Mr. McClain, you recognize.
Yeah, thank you. Just a small statement. I want to echo something that Mr. Melendez just said. I think our process has been sound. We have been fortunate and unfortunate in a manner in that we were fortunate that the referendum passed, which now changes the very dynamics, or could change the very dynamics of this organization going forward. And we've had another unfortunate incident in that a lawsuit was filed that basically has put a cloud over this and caused some folks to have some time to sit back and reflect. So I don't think our process is broken. I don't think we've had missteps in the process. In fact, I like what I see right now, and that we're sitting down here discussing this, and you notice it's just not the ad hoc committee, it's almost the full board. So I'm pleased about the process. Like I said, I think we've just had some, what I would call monumental things that have happened, both positive and negative in some regards, for this organization, and we're working through that. I will echo what everybody here has said. I think the candidates we have right now, we're fantastic candidates. And if we decide to go forward with reopening this, I can support that too. I just want folks to realize that I think this process is good. And I think working through this in the manner we're doing it, I think is very good also. So.
Ms. Shanahan, you recognize.
Mr. Moser, have you asked the current candidate pool in terms of if we open it up, will they stay in the search or will they leave?
I did ask that. So I've obviously stayed pretty close because the candidates have seen the letters and they've seen the newspaper articles and they've reflected it on themselves. So I've had extensive conversations almost on a daily basis with the candidates.
Good, that's important.
To keep them engaged in the process and say, look, this is not unusual. This is a board. There's 13 different members. There's 13 different perspectives in this. And so that these are things, as you're a CEO, you will deal with these sorts of things from time to time in your career. So I think they fully appreciate that. They fully understand it. I think that all of them said that they're very likely they're watching this right now, and if they're not watching it currently, they're probably going to watch it later on because they're well aware that we're meeting. So I think that while I've asked them to stay in the process, and I said that this was a possibility, that there is a possibility we do open this back up, they all said that they were going to reflect on it at that point in time. So I don't have I couldn't give you with 100% confidence that all of them will stay in. I've asked them to, and I've told them that I've heard that from the perspective of various board members that they're very strong, qualified candidates, and it's not about their talent or their qualifications, but obviously there's, we go back to what sort of message do they take away from whatever decision we make today.
My second question is, and I think it's important to talk about salary versus comp. Compensation is the whole package. And, you know, I think when we did Catherine's, I think my very first board meeting, there was this focus on salary, and then there was really a look at what's the compensation package. So what percentage of these jobs have a variable component that a percentage of their comp is, because you can set metrics around that, you can set goals, it can be attained, it can be a bonus based on achievement. I mean, there's for people that, you know, haven't worked outside in the private sector, there's all sorts of variables to that component. I think it's important to understand that as a board. So what you've talked to all these, there's 22 searches going on right now. What percentage of the comp would be in a variable, you know, package like that?
From my experience, those conversations take place more frequently today because of incentivizing people. But I think that from my experience doing this work in quasi-public organizations, the concern is how it's viewed for somebody to get what's considered to be a discretionary bonus. While you can set metrics and targets and you can target them at certain things, what are those targets really? Are they automatically achievable? So we're just shielding some compensation to make it look more palatable on base salary. So from my experience, when I look at even agencies like MARTA, in Atlanta, the bonuses are relatively nominal. There's sometimes 5, 10%. It's unusual to see things more than 20%. I'd say even 20% somewhat more unusual. There are a couple of unique circumstances where there are some large bonuses out there. There's one large agency where, but the CEO has been there for 15 years, and it's an incentive, really a retention incentive to keep that person so he doesn't go anywhere else. So I see that more often. I see other vehicles for compensation in CEO packages. I see things like car allowances, although candidly I've seen agencies shy away from those because we're offering public transit, and if you're a CEO of a public transit agency, you would hope the person's on the system seeing how the system's operating. Yeah. So I've seen agencies shy away from that. I've seen deferred compensation, whether it's in a 401k type program, a 457, a 401a. I've seen other sorts of allowances for being able to conduct their business, whether it's a travel allowance to go to association and conference type things and things like that. There are different avenues and vehicles I've seen. I've seen automatic increases or target increases in salary. So it may be a goal of, instead of a bonus, a goal that there's a 3, 5, or 7% increase for the next year if certain targets are achieved. So there are many different and various things you can do. And the other part of this that we didn't spend time talking about, but as we're talking about different components of compensation that are important to candidates, is contract lengths. I've seen 3-year contracts with 1-year optional renewals. I've seen 5-year contracts, and different candidates have different perspectives on that. And I believe there's a law in the state of Florida that no public sector CEO can have a severance clause beyond 5 months. Outside of the state of Florida, I've seen those negotiated from anywhere from 6 months to a year. So, but of course here there's a law that precludes it and caps that amount. But those are the various components I've seen in contracts where CEOs or boards and CEOs will negotiate for different components.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I haven't said a word. Now I think I need to say something. Ms. Shanahan made a very excellent groundwork of what Florida is all about, and specifically the Sunshine Law. We have the strictest Sunshine Law in the country. I was in Tallahassee. Ms. Shanahan was there when we went through a lot of things to try to find people to come work here. Regardless of what their backgrounds were, the Sunshine Law prevented a lot of people, probably most qualified, for coming to Florida. I've sat on search committees where we had to deal with the Sunshine Law, and a lot of times, again, we missed out on excellent candidates. I'm gonna tell you right now, University of South Florida looking for president is about to run into that. I guarantee you, they're gonna run into that. Where you have people sitting there, maybe a university president wants to come to a bigger university, a larger university, a provost, executive vice president, and once they see that, they're not going to come here. That's not going to happen. The other thing is, I've sat for some reason as chair of agencies where twice we've had to hire CEOs, and the process that we went through was to me the best process out there when we bring in CEOs, and that's to have an ad hoc committee to go through the applications and the resumes and look at those videos. And in one instance we had people come in even before we were waiting them down and had face-to-face interviews with them, did the due diligence, and came with well-qualified people to run those agencies. I think the ad hoc committee did that. They came up with the best qualified people we had, and was getting ready to bring them to you for interviews. We've talked to Mr. Moser about salary, and he's told us in certain instances, salary may bring in one candidate. We've talked about changing the education. That brings in possibly one candidate. How would we look as a board, opening up the process to look at bringing in one or two more candidates, maybe? We would look pretty bad if we did something like that. I really do believe that. The other fact of the matter is, if we increase the salary and we did not get any more candidates, those three people that we're looking at, hell, they're going to want the salary that we're offering. I would. If we send up to $350,000, I'm sitting there, I would want that salary. Think about it. We talk about CEO having a vision, a CEO coming into this county that, and I think that the overall, in May, we're going to have the lawsuit thrown out, and we'll move on with the wish of the will of the people and what they wanted. So we're sitting at an agency that's going to boom within the next year. We talk about a person having vision. We talk about a person that can come in here and manage a staff that's going to really put this agency on top and be one of the best ones in this country. 13 months ago, we hired this gentleman sitting to my right to take this agency and move through really a tough time. If we're going to talk about having someone with vision to do that, maybe we need to talk to him about staying. He's been here. He's done the job. He's taken us through some really tough times, making cuts to services and then going back and talking to the people that came in here and put those services back on a shoestring budget. So if that's the case, why we want to open it back up? We could look at maybe increasing the salary and keeping him here. Think about it. Think about it. I think that's something that we need to consider. Sitting in the job, doing the job, looking at what the future holds, looking at that lawsuit being thrown out, which I think is going to happen, and where do we go? You're going to bring somebody in with not having the experience here, not really knowing what Hillsborough County is all about. This gentleman sitting here knowing what it is, what's about. Now, I know that doesn't make some people in the audience happy, but that's just the way it could be. You need to think about that. He's doing the job. He's planning for. He's putting a plan in place already for when this lawsuit is thrown out to get us where we need to be. But if you're not happy with those three, look at this guy in this Chinese tie.
interesting way of putting it.
I don't think that's a criteria.
No, it's
The
not.
Chinese guy.
No, it's not. But if you want to have a criteria of a person's vision, a person that's going to take us down the road, a person that's going to look at where we go when this lawsuit is thrown out, a person that's going to make this agency the best it possibly can be. The gentleman is sitting here since January of 2000, this is December of 2017, doing the job. But tonight, you recognize.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate all the input from everyone. It's very interesting. But what I think, and even with Mr. Seward, you know, thinking about what you said, look at it, I already thought about it. And these applicants, the ad hoc committee, I thought that they did an excellent job. I looked at some of the experience and qualification, and it looked real well. But also, too, I'm thinking when I went around some of the places in the HART, on 21st, out in the street, and some of the things that the people want to see happen. One of the biggest things is, you know, even, and I always bring it up with the bus drivers and the different ones about trying to get that taken care of. So I'm asking, it's in process. You know, it's between the union and the HART, but it's in the process. A lot of the great things I'm hearing, you're right, Mr. Seward and even Ms. Lee and the rest of some of the ones asking, they're doing things. So if we can't look at what we already said we wanted to do, is have the ad hoc committee narrow it down. I also listened to Chairman Miller said that after the ad hoc, someone started talking about these things. We can't keep kicking the ball. It don't look good for us. I think that we should really make a decision. And if these don't work, let's see what the vision is. But Mr. Seward and some of the ones that include the workforce and everybody on how we can move forward and be innovative, the passion that should be conveyed to the people and what you feel. So I'd like to entertain that. I'm not with going back and keep going. We should have been done.
Chair.
Mr. Suarez, you recognize.
At this point, well, I don't think Ms. Overman spoke before, but she asked some questions. I would suggest that we go forward with the recommendation of the ad hoc committee. I'm a big believer, like you are, that when you create a committee and they make a decision, that you then follow up with that decision to the full board so that we can figure out what the next steps are. You know, there's a reason why I was here for the ad hoc committee. I did not speak because I want the committee to make the decision, even if, you know, I know what the thoughts are in the room. I really believe that we do have our candidates and we should go forward. I think that's the best direction that we can take for this agency so that we can have the kind of stature that we need to have going forward throughout the country for other jobs that we're going to have to get when this agency starts to grow. And I think that that's an important aspect of this. And that would be my suggestion. I hope that other folks would support that.
Mr. Menendez, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Suarez. And I think after everything that's been discussed, I feel that diligence has been exercised today. The fact that we came up with the fact that there would theoretically be 2 candidates. I don't know. I wanted to note that people from the community expressed concerns, groups from the community expressed concerns, concerns were published, but I feel good about what we've discussed today and from a diligence standpoint regarding those concerns. Thank you.
Commissioner Overman, you recognize.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I'm really glad we've done this. My correspondence and letters and concerns have absolutely no reflection on whether or not our candidates are excellent candidates, and make sure that they know that. My concern was what we are discussing now, you know, knowing that there are that many searches going on, knowing that the candidates that we have the skills that we have described that are necessary for this job, and having an understanding of what the compensation market looks like, rather than the conversation I believe we had, which was, where do we want to start? I think is an important part of the process. Thank you, Mr. McLean, for making that comment, because it helped frame, I think, where we might want to go. You know, if we've got great candidates, and based on what the market's out there, there's only 2 possibles, maybes, that didn't apply or didn't want to even start the conversation based on the compensation, then I'm very comfortable with moving forward, with allowing the ad hoc committee to do the best job that they're already doing.
Commissioner Smith, you recognize.
Thank you. I'd just like to express that I feel like we have very good candidates in this, in our final pool through our process, and I'm excited about moving forward with what we have. So whatever this board decides, I just wanted to be someone who expressed confidence in our current candidates and hope that they stick with us through wherever we go.
Mr. Harden, you recognize.
May I make a motion now?
Sure.
To approve the recommendations of the ad hoc committee and move forward with the job interviews on Monday.
Second.
No, motion by Mr. Harden, second by a group.
The entire board.
Then we move forward. And then, pardon? Second by
Everyone, all of us.
Sister Overman.
We got unanimity.
You got that?
Yes.
Okay. To the motion, Commissioner Kemp recognized. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to add this or see about discussion with regards to this, because Commissioner Miller, I appreciate your remarks about Mr. Seward. I have thought that Mr. Seward has done an incredible job in the last year of moving this agency. I've been amazed at the kinds of things that he has worked on, at the remarks in the community that have been made to me about how HART is being managed in the last year. I thought we heard that when we heard the consultant that was the management consultant that was brought in to talk to the staff about the direction of the agency and where it had been, and then how the changes were being made, and the morale of the staff. I just think in so many ways that Mr. Seward has excelled. That's not something, I mean, that's something we had a discussion about before we had that vote, and I think Mr. Seward, based on the past history, elected not to include his name in the pool. But I'd like to know at this time if, you know, if and maybe he can't say it now, but I would like to entertain or see if we could have Mr. Seward's name added to the pool for consideration. I just wanted to bring that forward and echo your remarks.
I second that motion.
Chinese tie it off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate those kind words. It's been, I didn't do anything over the last year. The people in this audience did the work over the last year. I appreciate the sentiments. I made a conscious decision not to apply, and I actually provided you a letter on those reasons. It isn't due to me thinking I have the inability to do the job. I think it's time the organization has an experienced planning CEO come forward. Also, from more of an ethical standpoint, I don't feel comfortable competing against someone that I will be serving under. I would prefer to be ready to support whoever that is coming through the door in the best capacity that I can to make them successful and to make you successful. And again, I appreciate, I very much do, those words. However, I will not be asking to have my name considered. But thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated.
So let me ask you another question, just flatly and bluntly. If this board today decided to hire you, would you accept the position?
That is a different question. I would say that I would have to have a serious discussion with Mrs. Seward, considering that opportunity.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor to continue with the process. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, let it be known by raising your hand. That's unanimous. We move on. I think that the schedule we have right now, if I'm correct, is they're going to be here for interviews next Thursday. Am I correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We have the schedule is 100% confirmed, Lena? Okay. So we do have all of the board members scheduled for Thursday, January 31st at specific times. I know we have a few Skype interviews set up as well. The interviews start at 3:30, and has the schedule already been promulgated? No, okay. It will be coming out. I will be meeting with each of the candidates too prior to the first interview at 3:30, just to give a quick overview of the organization. And then we go through the interviews from 3:30 to 9 p.m. on the 31st. And then on February 1st at the 9 a.m. regular board meeting. And by the way, we have a full agenda aside from the interviews as well. So we'll try to move through those things pretty quick. But the 3 candidates will be here. 5-minute presentations per candidate, and then 40 minutes available for discussion, if I remember correctly.
That's correct, yes.
That's 40 minutes per candidate?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Williams, recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the purpose of the records, Mr. Seward, I am scheduled to meet with the candidates FaceTime on January 28th, not the 31st.
That's correct. There are some.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
Mr. Linders,
I just want to, Mr. Moser, thank you for doing a great job, and thank you for physically coming here today in person. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank the entire board here for your leadership. As I said earlier, we've gone through this process, and I think the process is right. So thank you for the leadership.
Mr. Melchanic, you recognized.
The question about considering Mr. Seward sort of wasn't answered, but I mean, procedurally, based on your question, would it be appropriate for us to continue to consider him as part of this process? I mean, I would like for him to be in the running. He can always decline.
That's up to, first and foremost, you heard his comments. He basically, to me, said that he has to have a conversation with his wife, and I understand that. You want to call on that?
Can you put it on speaker?
She's sitting there. Can she talk?
No.
That would be up to this board and Mr. Seward. If this board wants to add him to the list of interviews.
I'll make a motion to that effect.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second to add Mr. Seward's name to the list of interviews. Further discussion, Mr. Linders,
I have a comment. Yeah, I understand the spirit and intent of that, and I don't disagree. I wanted Jeff the first time, but respecting his wishes to talk to his wife, I just would caveat that if this were to go forward, I would want to honor that he needs to speak with his family, and so I don't know how that plays into this, but I just wanted to acknowledge how important that is.
We can't legally require him to accept the job. So it's a safe bet.
Let's do this. I think that Mr. Seward has the weekend to talk to his wife. She's sick right now. He has the weekend to talk to his wife. And then Monday morning, Mr. Seward can call and contact me and give me his decision. If that decision is correct, if he decides he wants to do that, Lena will then send out an email to everyone that what his decision is, that he says yes or no. If he does, then we have to readjust the schedule for interviews. Simple as that. Mr. Sister, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm the new kid on the block, and I had the privilege of sitting with Mr. Seward as an orientation, and that was my first question: why aren't you in the list? And so, but I understand his reasons, and I respect those reasons. But we also got to remember that whoever we bring in is going to need a very good right arm in order to, who knows where everything is and how everything operates. So we're going to have to respect his wishes, and like I said, but yeah, I also had the same question as to why aren't you in the pool. But just remember, we're going to need somebody who's going to work with this new person, whoever it might be. But as a side note, being the new kid on the block, I appreciate the opportunity to bring this forward, as I wasn't involved in the original discussions when we first set out to seek a new CEO. So I appreciate this, and I think it's very good. Everybody gets to hear their comments, and we know where people are thinking and where their heads are, and I believe that it really will be beneficial to the board as a whole.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. Mr. Suarez.
Okay. There are two issues here. Okay, one, he just said that he will not want to entertain going into the pool of applicants to be considered.
That's right.
Okay, so that's a different issue. Okay, what Mr. Mechanic's motion was to allow him back into the pool of applicants. So I think we're at cross purposes here to the motion. So I don't think that that's a proper process to go through after we've already just voted to allow the board to go forward with the 3 that we had. That's just a procedural question for me. You, Chair, asked the question about him if he would be willing to be considered if he was not part of the pool, and that was a different question. And so I think that we just have to get our heads around what we're talking about. I would not support Mr. Mechanic's motion because I don't think it goes to what was said by Mr. Seward. So I don't think we should do that. That's my own personal opinion.
Hold on. Wait. I got everybody raising their hand.
Okay, there were two different motions, Chair. If I remember correctly, we already voted on a motion to go forward with the 3 applicants. Mr. Mechanic made the motion to tell him if he would be reconsidered to get back into the pool of applicants, not to offer him the job. No. If I'm correct, Mr. Mechanic.
Correct.
I may be wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so that's why. It's a little bit of a disconnect.
Okay. Mr. McClain, you recognize.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Commissioner Suarez just mentioned there. Procedurally, I think we're going a little too fast here. In addition, I think as we look at bringing those 3 candidates forward, now you have somebody that's engaging with those candidates that will be competing against those candidates. So it makes it somewhat a little bit unfair there. So I would ask us to rethink that, if we would, in terms of having him enter the 3 pools again.
Okay. Mr. Allen, you recognize.
So I just have a question for council. So if we interview candidates and decided to hire none of them, then we can hire or promote somebody who already works for us. He doesn't need to be in the pool, right? So that option is open to us. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So Mr. Mechanic could withdraw his motion and we could get to the same point.
I'll withdraw my second.
Yeah.
So,
okay, hold on.
Procedurally,
yeah. Commissioner Kemp has withdrawn her second to the motion. Mr. Mechanic has not withdrawn his motion. So is there another second to the motion? Is there a second? Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Okay. So we're right back where we were.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Knight, you recognize.
Mr. Chairman, pretty much what Director Harden was saying, once we voted for the CEO and we didn't follow through with it, and we said that we would go out for a search, and now we're down to 3 candidates. I think being open-minded, that we said that we would do that, we can be open-minded and see what the process is and how it come out. If we don't feel that neither one of them meet the criteria of the direction we'd like for Heartline to go in, then he would have an opportunity, right? That's what, he don't need to be in the pool.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Were you done, Mr. Knight?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Williams, you recognize.
Thank you. I've been listening. We've talked a lot about salary. We've talked about the education and the option that we made. There are 2 more candidates. And from my standpoint, I look at that we want someone who absolutely wants this job. Yeah. Someone who is passionate about it, committed, and even if the salary is not what we say or what we voted upon, then the person should have the leadership to come back and say, I want this job, but I'd like for you to take to the board that I need a little bit more money and revote or make a decision at that point. I just am very passionate about making sure we have the right people who are walking in the door for the right reasons. And I respect Mr. Seward and the work that you've done and some of the things that you've experienced and have pushed and persevered through. So thank you for that. But at the same time, I want to recognize that people that want the job, no matter what we've discussed today, they apply for it.
Councilman Suarez, you recognize.
I was just going to say, I think that what Mr. Knight said is correct. We go through the process. If for some reason we need to reopen it up because we don't like the pool of candidates, I think we can do that. And if Mr. Seward changes his mind, he can apply just like before. I think that when you do a public process like this, I don't think that we should make that kind of decision without a full public discourse. And there's nothing wrong with Mr. Seward. We like Mr. Seward, and I think he knows that. He and I have had private conversations about this many, many times. And I just think that we should just go forward, do our stuff. If for some reason we don't like our candidates, we make a decision then as to what the next steps are going to be.
Ms. Shanahan, you recognize.
I'd like to thank the Vice Chairman for the clarity of those comments.
Thank you.
If you're sitting in any one of those 3 cities where our candidates are sitting and you just heard this conversation, I'd withdraw. I'm telling you, that's like a backdoor, let's go get the candidate that's sitting here that doesn't want the job. And I mean, I have a lot of respect for Jeff. When we had this conversation, when we just went through the process, go back to slide, whatever it is. We started it, we stopped it, we started it, we started it again. We had conversations around it each one of those times. He was not a candidate. He chose not to be a candidate. You have to respect a person's professional decision based on that. And I think we need additional experience. Not different experience or different experience. We need additional experience to take us to the next level. And I really hope that if you're listening out there, you understand what Tampa needs and you fight for this position beyond the dysfunction of some of the conversation you just heard at this board level. With all due respect, it was well-intended comments and I appreciate the sentiment of that, but that was, I mean, again, maybe I've spent too much time in the private sector and I'm not living just in Tampa Bay, but that was a reverse signal that we just sent to the marketplace. And I just, he sent a letter, which was a very thoughtful letter. I respect his decision. I agree with the councilman that said we need a strong number 2. We need to add capacity to this organization with different experiences. We don't need to just promote from within. Thank you.
Any other comments? Mr. Hart.
One quick point of new business, if you could, if I indulge me. I think that Rick Fernandez was appointed by the city of Tampa as the TAC committee representative, and I know he was one of the choices we had, so I guess everybody...
That'll come under new business. Hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second.
Sorry.
Is there any other discussion on where we are? We're going on with the 3 candidates. Will be here Thursday for interviews, starting at 3:30, and then Friday morning at 9 o'clock we have another board meeting. We okay with that? Okay. All right. Moving on. Is there any public input on general concerns? I don't see anyone out there. Okay. Mr. Moser, you can have a seat, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any old business? Any new business? Now, Mr. Hart, you brought up the fact that Rick Fernandez has been selected by the city of Tampa to be on their independent oversight committee,
right?
Which takes him out of the running for here. I think staff has given me a list of the remaining persons that was interested in serving on that, and asked me, there are 2 selections that have to be made?
Yes.
2 selections that have to be made from that. Now, what's the process on this? What are we doing here then?
last board meeting, it was discussed that the board members will individually review the all applications that they received and select 2 top choices each and submit them to staff. Staff will tally them, and at the next board meeting, which will be on Friday, February 1st, I will present the top choice, whoever got the most votes, and then we will vote on the 2 seats.
So everyone has this package?
Yes.
Okay, so it has to be to you by when?
Yes, today.
Today?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so.
Monday.
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 You understand what's going on? We have to select 2 new people to serve on our independent, whatever it's called.
Oversight Committee.
Oversight Committee.
Oversight Committee.
Because Mr. Menendez is now gone to the city of Tampa. Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. I'm new. It'll take a while to get the name in. I had picked Rick Fernandez for one of my top picks, and so I'll have to pick someone else. And at the time that I did, when we were talking about this, I made a strong pitch for him, and I'd like to make a pitch instead for Dustin Lemke. And I remember that someone else mentioned him because he stood out as someone who had walked the walk. He's someone who, first of all, he's a dean of Hillsborough Community College, dean of arts, and he has gone without a car for 7 years, actually as a customer of HART's. Also, he served on the MPO's Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee for 2 years. And I spoke with his references yesterday, who recommend him highly as someone who gives back to the community in many ways, so that's my pitch. I'm hoping that we can look outside the box like we talked about in that meeting and get somebody who actually experiences the transit as a customer, and that would be Dustin Lemke.
Okay. All right. So you have the packages. You need to get your 2 recommendations to by end of the workday Friday. End of the workday Monday. Okay. All right. Is there any other new business? Seeing none, we're adjourned.